Hello John, today we're going to talk about baptism and education. How important is baptism?
Baptism is for a Catholic or a Christian is a gift. In my own case, my father and mother, I was baptised by my parents, made my first communion and my confirmation, and I can thank my parents for bringing me that far. When you're a baby, I regard it as an honour that I was happened to be born in Ireland and baptised, first Holy Communion and confirmation as a Catholic. So it's very important.
Okay, so it's mentioned that at the moment in some members of the Dáil Éireann are questioning baptism. I think you have an article there in front of you, do you?
That's right, and I'll just read it out. This is in yesterday's Irish Independent, dated the 7th of June, Tuesday the 7th of June. Now, it could be that they were questioned or in interview because one of them has been nominated. He was a TD, and I'll read the article first and then I'll comment on it if I may.
Okay.
Opposition TDs hit out at lack of action on an inverted commas baptism barrier. A dreadful title in the first place, and it's written by a correspondent in the Irish Independent named Cormac McQuinn, political correspondent. I presume he interviewed these people. I'll read this article out. The Education Minister Richard Bruton of Fine Gael has been accused of going against, an inverted commas, progressive measures, end inverted commas, progressive measures proposed during the last government, as he will not tackle, inverted commas, the baptismal barrier in schools. This is the attack on the schools, by the way, that was mounted by the previous Fine Gael Labour government with a large majority, in which they were roundly defeated in the February 2006 general election, where Labour was decimated down to lucky to have seven TDs in Dáil Éireann, with a new leader, and the Fine Gael roundly defeated, down from 70 odd to 50 TDs, and now having to sort of depend on independence and so on. But has the Labour Party learned their lesson and realised that their support for and the Fine Gael support for the same-sex marriage referendum, which they ran through and confused the electorate, I believe it was payback time for what they did with the Labour Party and their support for abortion and various other anti-Catholic and Christian policies. I think the electorate gave them their views, but they haven't accepted that, putting it down to economic measures. So I'll finish this article. The Irish Independent revealed yesterday that Mr. Bruton will not be dealing with the situation that allows Catholic schools to give priority enrolment to children of their faith and proper order. Labour Senator, this is the man that was a TD in Dublin Clontarf and roundly defeated. A man, when he was a minister, was never behind in attacking the ethos of the Catholic and Christian faith. A former headmaster in a school which would be supposed to be Catholic, said the lack of action, inverted commas, flies in the face of all progressive, he calls it, progressive measures his party attempted to take. Progressive. So, while the minister announced an initiative to speed up the process of increasing the number of non-denominational schools, it emerged there will be no specific action on the inverted commas baptism rule that can cause an issue in about 20% of schools which are oversubscribed, and these are Catholic schools, by the way. Mr. O'Riordan said it was desperately disappointing, inverted commas. He said it was reasonable that parents would want to send their child to their local school regardless of its ethos. So I presume Catholics could go to Muslim schools regardless of the Muslim ethos. I think that would be unthinkable, and Mr. O'Riordan should realise that and stop attacking Catholic schools. And that they were not seeking to change how the school was managed in doing that. Meanwhile, Paul Murphy, a new TD, and got in by a handful of votes of the Against Profit Alliance, People Against Profit. So they hope companies will not be able to make a profit, and thus probably we have to close. So
Go ahead. Go.
and thus have to close. So it's very difficult to understand what they mean by people against profit. That it was, in inverted commas, basic discrimination. He calls it discrimination that Catholic schools wish to have Catholics in their school. Against minority faiths and people who aren't religious, like himself. His group is planning to reintroduce a bill on the matter into the Dáil to get rid of the baptism barrier. They call it a barrier. They're flying in the face of any common sense, these two proponents for calling baptism a barrier. A spokesman for Mr. Bruton responded to the criticism, arguing that, inverted commas, the most direct way of dealing with this is by providing more non-denominational and multi-denominational schools, and we're doing that. He said that legislation required would face, inverted commas, significant constitutional difficulties, but that Mr. Bruton would be discussing the issue further with an Oireachtas committee. Now, this is what Mr. Bruton's response was. Now, not too many years ago, Ireland did not have this problem of catering for people who arrived in this country in vast numbers, courtesy of the inaction of the Fine Gael Labour government and perhaps the previous governments as well. So now that they're here in a country that's supposed to be bankrupt, a number in their near enough probably coming to 1 million. The last count it was well over 500,000, and it seems to be increasing every other day. So schools have to be built for these non-Christian people that have descended on our country, and Mr. Murphy and O'Riordan I want to cater for these people, although I'm not aware that these people are voting for them. So they've turned their back on their Catholic and Christian neighbours to support all these people who have suddenly arrived in the country over the recent years, and cater for them, and want to call baptism a barrier.
You mentioned there bills to build schools, okay? Do you think that certain minorities or majorities should be catered for that are not Irish nationals? Do you think they should have special schools, or should they be integrated with society in a normal school?
I think first of all it should be discussed in its entirety. This piecemeal effort as regards schools and accommodation, for example, the politicians and the media are now constantly talking about homelessness. I don't know how you can provide homes for the vast amount of people arriving in the country. I think if they build 1 million homes, they could be occupied by all the ones that's arriving. So, who's the homeless? What is the homeless problem that they're talking about? If we half a million and more people from other jurisdictions with their families and children. Now they want to have schools, build them at the taxpayers' expense. Why can't it be discussed in a wider context so as the Irish citizens already here whose families gone before built these schools without any help from the state, and these schools were manned in the main by Christian brothers and nuns and others because the education there wasn't enough lay people to provide the education. So you see, our fathers and mothers provided the funds with very meagre means to build the schools for their children, along with the local clergy, so now that the schools had to be provided by the state for all these people arriving, this multicultural society that we're suddenly faced with. So I think this discussion about schools and all the rest of it would need to be spoken about in a broader context, and bring the Irish voter that votes for these politicians that are proposing these various measures, and talking about doing away with baptism, etc.
Okay, I just want to ask you, is education meeting the needs of students and society today, do you think?
Well, in some ways it's given them an education and perhaps qualification at the end of that education, but a citizen is made up of more than the sum of its parts. In other words, there's more to a student than the economic aspect of their nature. A student is a physical, mental, emotional, psychological and spiritual being that needs all these items catered for. He or she are finding their feet in the world and need a certain amount of guidance and measures by which they can judge as to how they're progressing in these other areas of the life skills, not least the exams. I believe from what the media, by way of the television, our local, our national broadcaster, RTE, with the different channels they have, and TV3, I believe the sort of emphasis that young people are put under does not develop that important spiritual side of their life. That is sadly neglected, and by the attacks that I've just outlined earlier, shows the sort of way that they can be led astray.
Can you tell us about Hedge schools?
This is the background, funny enough, to where we are today. People, when I did my secondary education, we were informed of the background against which we were getting an education. For example, in the 1800s, there was no such thing as a Catholic school. Catholics were not allowed to be educated or taught. They were taught by itinerant teachers, teaching in hedge schools. Hedge schools were schools that were on the side of the road so as the authorities wouldn't know, because if they knew they would be arrested and perhaps prosecuted by the laws of that time. Catholics were not allowed to be educated or even practice their religion. So this is the background of where we come from, and not that long ago in the 1800s, that poor Catholic children had to be taught that way, and so as they could read and write and have some basic education. Teachers that time put their lives at risk.
Can we discuss Catholic emancipation?
Catholic schools were not allowed to be established until Catholic emancipation, which came into place through the efforts of the famous lawyer Daniel O'Connell.